I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table is resolved, guns keep people safe. Resolved, guns keep people safe. I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. And Mr. Kelso, I'd like to call on Mr. Kelso. You have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a complex topic, so I wrote down my thoughts. The question of whether guns keep us safe is moot if they're taken away, so I'll spend some time on the Second Amendment. Sorry, I'll be rushed because I know there's a time limit. There's no need to argue over the meaning of the Second Amendment. We can read what the founders said. A militia are in fact the people themselves and include all men capable of bearing arms. The mind that aims at a select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-republican principle. Richard Lee, signer of the Declaration of Independence. I ask, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. George Mason, speech during the Virginia Convention to ratify the Constitution. The said Constitution shall never be construed to authorize Congress to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Samuel Adams. Laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Thomas Jefferson. If you think those are just old white men you shouldn't be listened to, Huey Newton said, any unarmed people are slaves or are subject to slavery at any given moment. If the guns are taken out of the hands of the people, only the pigs have guns, then it's off to the concentration camps, the gas chambers, or whatever the fascists in America come up with. One of the democratic rights of the United States, the Second Amendment, gives the people the right to bear arms. However, there is a greater right, the right of human dignity that gives all men the right to defend themselves. If you don't care about the Second Amendment or what the founders meant, there are 3 important reasons to encourage law-abiding citizens to own guns. The first reason to own a firearm is self-defense. This is important now more than ever as violent crime is rising in every major city. A bumper sticker sums it up perfectly. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. There are many gun laws on the books, but do criminals pay attention to them? The areas with the strictest gun controls usually have the highest gun crime rates. Criminals will always have guns. The question then is, should law-abiding citizens have guns? In 2013, a CDC study estimated that between 500,000 and 3 million crimes are prevented by people with guns every year, most without a shot being fired. That compares to about 300,000 gun crimes committed yearly. In another study, the CDC said that there was insufficient evidence to determine the effectiveness of any of the firearms laws reviewed for preventing violence. In one study, 60% of the convicted felons interviewed admitted they avoided committing crimes when they knew the victim was armed. It is my right and my duty to protect myself and my family from criminals. I'm a strong supporter of the police, but they are reactive. They are very rarely able to prevent crimes. They just come and write a report after the crime has been committed and may or may not catch the criminal. I'm lucky. I'm white and I've lived my entire life in relatively safe neighborhoods. Self-protection is doubly important for people who live in poor, crime-ridden neighborhoods. Look at the numbers. Gun crime is no higher and sometimes lower in states with higher gun ownership. We accept risks all the time as a trade-off for benefits. In 2021, 43,000 people died in car accidents and about 21,000 died by gunshot, not counting suicides. The majority of these were gang-related. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to minimize gun deaths. By all means, severely punish criminals who use guns and prevent the mentally ill from obtaining guns. Make gun training ubiquitous. I'm not opposed to placing restrictions on private ownership of true military weapons, but not on semi-automatic handguns or rifles that might look scary to some. Taking guns away from law-abiding citizens is not the way to make people safe. The second reason to own a firearm is to discourage or prevent tyranny. I know this is a stretch for many people. People should read history. All great civilizations have gone through periods of civil turmoil and tyranny, and all tyrannical governments ban the ownership of guns. The third reason to own a firearm is to deter our enemies. Again, it's a stretch to imagine such a scenario, but since we're now the most powerful nation on earth, But things change. All we need to do is look at what's going on in Ukraine right now to understand how important this is. Of course, you can't fight a modern army, even with AR-15s, but you can sure as heck stand up an insurgency like those in Vietnam and Afghanistan. And it
Bob,
would
you're
be a
about a
lot
minute over.
easier. And it would be a lot easier with guns in the hands of the good guys. Okay.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you for this excellent first speech, and thank you for opening us up tonight. We will now go to questions for the speaker. If you have a question for the speaker, please raise your hands. Please raise your Zoom hands if you have a question. I see a question from Molly Zeff. Ms. Zeff, please unmute yourself. Ask your question to me.
Thank you so much. And thank you for a very brave first speaker. You gave me a lot of things to Google and think deeply about. Oh,
the speaker gave you.
Speaker gave me, I have such a hard time with that. Yeah, that's like that's my downfall at BA debates. The speaker gave me so much to think about. I'm wondering, you mentioned that people with...
The speaker mentioned, he mentioned.
I'm so sorry.
Talk to me.
I get nervous. Right. The speaker mentioned, there we go. I just need to get that out. The speaker mentioned that people who do not have guns are people enslaved. This was a quote about unarmed people being slaves. And I am wondering if the speaker views the countries that have been very strict with their gun laws and removal of guns. I'm going to throw out a couple of classic examples, Australia and New Zealand. Do you view all those, does the speaker view Australians and New Zealanders as enslaved, and why or why not?
Excellent question. Thank you, Ms. Mr. Speaker.
No, I don't view them as enslaved. I quoted Huey Newton, for those who don't know, a Black revolutionary, a Black Panther, commenting that that is something that can happen and has happened throughout history. I'm not saying that it's happened now in Australia. Things change. Also, America is different than Australia. America has a different culture, for good or bad, and there are more gun crimes, more people with guns here. We're never going to get rid of them. If you could snap your fingers and get rid of all the guns, I might consider that as an option, but that's never going to happen. So I have to deal with reality.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, questioner. We will go to one more question for the speaker real quick. Let's go to Louis Lieb. Mr. Lieb, please unmute yourself. Ask your question to me.
Yes. Does the speaker believe that the Constitution protects specifically the right to rebel against the federal government?
Excellent question. Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I do. If the government becomes tyrannical and the government imposes unconstitutional measures or takes unconstitutional steps, I do believe that.
And with that, the speaker and the speaker's questioners are thanked. Thank you very much for opening us on this fascinating start. And I will look forward to hearing more questions and more speeches on some of the lines of inquiry that have been brought up here, because this will be quite interesting. So with that, we are going to go to our first speech in the negative. I am looking for a speech in the negative. Do we have a speaker who would like to speak in the negative on this resolution? Dwayne Wilder, I had seen you on one of the lists. Are you interested in speaking on this? No worries if you're not. You're on mute.
Yes, yes, thank you. I was fiddling with my hand control there.
Are you willing to speak?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Excellent. In that case, you have 4 minutes. Go ahead and start now.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't have my timer with me, but I'll
let you know.
Watch there. Thank you. The question is, does guns make people more safe? And I would argue that that is a conundrum. It depends on many factors. Many of those factors are developmental. They are problems that are dealt with in the moment, either successfully or not successfully. I'm a Navy vet. I've borne weapons, not in combat, but in dicey situations, infiltrating beyond Guantanamo Bay Naval Air Station's borders to retrieve plane parts and pilot parts, unfortunately. But that was an incursion, and I was armed and with a radio to communicate with base on behalf of all the other people who were out there with garbage bags. To bear an armed weapon in a condition of any tension at all brings up emotions, brings up responses that are unique to the situation. They are not unique to the character. Sometimes I have entered dicey situations with gusto, and sometimes with, oh Lordy, get me out of here. I was not prepared to defend myself or anybody else in those moments. In other moments, I was very good at being certain, with the addition of my gun, that I could deal with the situation. And this comes, you know, from someone who was trained as part of boot camp in dealing with guns in difficult situations. I'm afraid that all too many citizens who own guns have no concept of that at all. They simply think that a gun is a tool for changing situations without any understanding that that change can go any way at all. Recently, a man actually stopped, a good man with a gun actually stopped a bad man with a gun before he shot too many people. How rare that is, and why is it rare? For one thing, people who bear arms aren't usually, you know, just part of the general population. As free as we are to do so, it doesn't follow that a good man with a gun, or a good woman with a gun for that matter, is going to be on scene with a gun and prepared to use it and prepared for the consequences. One of the consequences in one instance was that the man who shot someone was himself mistaken as the shooter and killed by the police. So the matter that guns make us more safe is a real conundrum, to say the least. And to say the most, it is a foil, an advertisement, and a selling point for gun manufacturers who will make as many guns as they can and sell as many guns as they can without any notion of whether these guns are going into the black market, are going across tables where there is no recognition of the buyer's ability to wield a weapon responsibly. And the NRA is not helping that at all with their insistence that everybody deserves the right to have a gun. No, that's not true. Everybody doesn't have a right to bear guns. A 16-year-old who wants to put down $2,000 on 2 assault weapons amounting to a military weapon. All right, I'll close it with that.
No,
That's
you
a
can
pretty
keep
good
going, but
place.
yep.
All right, so in Uvalde, the fellow was 20 years old, maybe 19 or 18, I forget. But he bought 2 of these weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. If you want, why not tax the ammunition? We certainly tax the ability to drive cars around. And I'll close with that. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We will go to a couple of questions for the speaker now. Let's go first to a question from Edward McGlone. Edward, please unmute yourself and ask a question to me of the speaker's speech.
Thank you. I would like the speaker to respond to this experience or my concern. I live in New York City. I grew up in the Long Island area.
Mr. McGlone, could you make sure to phrase this in the form of a question? I'm more than happy to have you give a speech later on, but I want to make sure that the question time is reserved for questions. Mr. McGlow?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how to reword my question. I'll pass my time for now.
Okay, great. In that case, but do raise your hand for speeches coming down because it sounds like this will be an interesting speech. So
Thank you.
let's go to a question from Michael Tilrico. Did I pronounce that right?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the speaker is on the subject of the rarity of good guys with a gun versus bad guys of a gun. According to the FBI statistics, in places where concealed handgun permits are allowed for regular citizens with background checks to be able to carry a gun, 42.3% of active shooters have been stopped with a good guy with a gun rather than a bad guy with a gun. I don't understand, or I want to know farther why you believe that 43% is rare. Why the speaker believes that 43% is rare.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you may respond however you please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tirico. I am unfamiliar with that statistic, to tell you the truth. I read the news and based my opinion on what I read in the news.
Thank you. Let's take a second question from Mike from Philadelphia. Mike, please unmute yourself. Ask your question of the speaker to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to piggyback my questions on what Mr. Tilrico said. I'm unfamiliar with the statistic that he mentioned, but I do know that the vast majority of the mass shootings that we've seen, I think since 1952, and that's not including the sort of conflated definition of mass shooting, which would include, say, any shooting typically in urban areas where there's some sort of a fight or drug dealers shooting at each other where more than one or more than two people are
Mike,
injured.
can you please make sure to frame this in the form of a question?
Sure. So what I would like to know is, in almost all of the sort of the typical mass shootings, like the one in Uvalde, that we've seen since 1952, they've occurred in gun-free zones. And even the Indianapolis mall shooting that just happened, where the kid, the 20-year-old, shot and stopped the shooter within 15 seconds, it was a gun-free zone.
Mike,
So I'm wondering if you've considered when you say that it is so rare for good guys with guns.
Mike, I need to keep you on format. Please refer to the speaker in the third person.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know, or Mr. Chair, I'd like to know if the speaker has considered the situation where the gun-free zones where these mass shootings are taking place specifically prohibit law-abiding citizens from the good guys with guns from carrying their guns in those situations. And I would also like to know considered.
Mike, I'm cutting off. I'm going to keep you to the one question, but I would like you to make a speech further down because I think you will have a fascinating things. That's okay.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. Dwayne, you may respond to it however you prefer.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure what Mike is referring to as gun-free zones, but possibly schools and shopping centers and so forth. So if he's speaking about the matter of arming teachers and arming security guards, that is a very, very fraught thing to do. When a person is bearing arms in the midst of unarmed children, for instance, one has a lot of scruple about where that gun gets pointed. Someone charging into a room suddenly with an assault rifle capable of firing upwards of 100 rounds in a single magazine has no need for such discrimination. And so it is a person trying to think through their responses against a fellow who is beyond thought. And arming in a situation like that is not a good defense. A good defense is making sure that guy doesn't get in the first place, doesn't get a weapon in the first place, doesn't pass security checks in the first place. It's often said if laws prevent gun ownership, only outlaws will have guns. Not if the law is good. We don't talk about murder that way. We don't say, if you make murder illegal, only murderers will murder. That's a non-starter for me. We certainly are able to govern the citizens of this country. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Dwayne, and thank you very much, questioners as well. We're now going to go to another speech in the affirmative, but I want to make just a very quick procedural note because I sense that we are going to run into this a little bit in this debate. And I want to let all of you know my what my chairing of this is going to be based on so that when I use it on you, you know what's happening. When you ask a question, please, 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 please ask it as a question. Ask it to get clarification on the speaker's viewpoints. And while it is okay to ask speakers about things that they might not know, it is always better for the speaker and for the course of the debate to ask the speakers about things that they said. In general, I find that adding facts that speakers did not reference to a speaker's speech usually winds up being something that throws the speakers off guard and does not particularly advance the debate. It's fine to do in some contexts, but I would ask you all to ask questions about the things that speakers say rather than about what they not say, if that's okay. I won't always rule questions that are trying to bring in new perspectives, but on things where there are a lot of data heavy things in particular, I just want to let you all know this is not a debate about what the objective reality on the ground is. This is a debate between all of us about our perceptions about that objective reality on the ground. And so to be fair-minded to each other in the spirit of brave evangelism, I would just ask that you try to be as curious as you can about other speakers while still holding strictly to your beliefs. And additionally, the best time to give facts and data and notes is in speeches. And I want lots and lots and lots of speeches, particularly from all of those of you who have lots of facts to share. So just a quick sharing note. This isn't a criticism on anybody. This is just a note for when I make interventions over the next 40 minutes or so. That's what's going to be in my mind, and it's nothing personal. It's all about the debate. So that sound good to everybody? All right, we will go ahead and proceed from here. So with that, I'm looking for another speech in the affirmative, and I would like to call on Miss Elizabeth Dahl. Elizabeth, would you like to be our speaker in the affirmative?
Sure.
Great.
Thank you.
You have 4 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to speak in the affirmative. Firearms are the great equalizer for me. The first speaker in the affirmative referred to himself as having been lucky. I was not so lucky. I was 19 when I moved out of my parents' house, something that was necessary for my health and future. I couldn't afford to live in a safe neighborhood, nor could I afford to continue suffering abuse every day in my parents' house. I moved to a basement apartment in the best neighborhood that I could afford, which wasn't great. I knew I knew that someone could easily break into my apartment, and that as a young woman living alone who walked through a dark parking lot well after nightfall most nights, I was at risk of being attacked. At 19, I couldn't legally carry a gun, regardless of my risk factors. I was old enough to live alone, according to the law, old enough to sign a contract, and old enough to be charged as an adult if I'd committed a crime, but not old enough, apparently, to defend myself with a gun. Inside my apartment, I kept a loaded shotgun under my bed in case someone broke in through my ground floor window, knowing that a handgun or an AR-15 would have been far superior for close quarters self-defense. But I also knew that at 19, the shotgun was my best legal option. Until recently, I commuted through downtown Seattle on a regular basis. Now I'm old enough that I have my concealed pistol license. During the long dark, as Seattleites call it, I both left for work and arrived home after nightfall. Mace is less than effective sometimes against people hopped up on drugs. And in downtown Seattle until recently, that was something I passed on a daily basis, multiple times a day. My regular walk to and from my bus stop and then to and from mass transit stops were by people who could have attacked me at any point in time, and occasionally involved waiting at dark bus stops. At one notable time, watching a man come around the corner swinging a very heavy rusty chain with a giant hook on the end of it, walking towards a group of us waiting for the bus, mumbling and then screaming incomprehensible obscenities at no one in particular, seemingly, but nonetheless swinging this chain toward us. I have never seen a group of people file onto a bus so quickly as that moment. Another day, a woman and I spent time wandering around a bus stop, doing our best to keep multiple layers of glass and cars between us and a seemingly crazy person who was also at the bus stop. There's nowhere to go, and if someone decides to attack you, the gun is the equalizer as a woman. I can't stop a 6'4" man by myself with my physical self. I can, however, shoot them. I can shoot them and kill them with a 45, with a 40, or with an AR-15. This is the great equalizer. It means that it doesn't matter where I go, it doesn't matter what I experience, it doesn't matter where I live or how impoverished a community I live in or what my risk profile for experiencing crime is. Having a firearm keeps me safe. Having a firearm ensures that I can defend myself against anyone of any size equally at any time. And it means that I can stop myself from becoming a victim of crime, and I can keep myself safe, and I can keep the people around me safe. And that is my speech.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let's go to a couple of questions for the speaker. I see a question first off from Rob Davies. Mr. Davies, please unmute yourself and ask your question to me.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm very, and I really appreciate that perspective from the speaker. That's one that definitely needs to be out there as a situation when someone needs to defend themselves. I'm curious what the speaker thinks about how to make sure that people in her situation, can maybe be able to defend themselves while making sure that people who might be attacking her or other people who maybe shouldn't have weapons don't get them. How can we make both things true?
Thank you for that, Madam Speaker.
Chair, I would respond to that by saying that we do have background checks in place for criminal backgrounds, and in my state also for mandatory psych holds of adults. So that is, I think that is what can be done to prevent people who shouldn't have access to guns from having access to guns. I think that there's always more that can be done on an individual level. If you or someone you know has someone unstable around them and doesn't lock up their guns, it's probably a bad idea, and they should be more responsible with their personal firearm ownership. But I think that often in the shootings that we see, people are either able to pass the background checks that exist because they don't actually have any felony conviction on their record, or because they broke the law to obtain a gun in the first place. And neither of those things is actually fixed by additional legislation.
Let's take a second question for the speaker from Catherine Jansky. Ms. Jansky, please unmute yourself, ask a question to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, the speaker mentioned several times sort of pistols and shotguns and AR-15s or assault rifles, generally, I imagine. in the same breath, and I was wondering if the speaker feels that all firearms are on the sort of same level when it comes to the risk reward management in terms of having pistols easily available versus assault rifles. Does she believe that there is no difference really between these firearms, that we shouldn't treat them differently?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I believe that as a matter of law, they should not be treated differently. They are different in terms of function and in terms of effectiveness. That's why I referenced a shotgun being less effective in terms of personal defense in close quarters compared to a pistol or an AR-15. Both of those are going to be more effective in a close quarters combat scenario compared to, for example, a shotgun, which is better at like 15 to 20 feet of distance where you have the most spread from a wad versus shooting someone from 5 feet away where you're probably still going to injure them and it's going to hurt, but it may not actually stop them. Also, it's going to be super messy, and a handgun will probably cost less out of your damage deposit.
The chair does not have any comment one way or the other on that last particular comment, having only ever seen most of these weapons in video games. So let's, Madam Speaker, are you willing to take one more question?
Sure.
Great. Let's get one question from Nils Brubacher. Mr. Brubacher, please unmute yourself. Ask your question to me.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, could I ask actually two questions in one?
If they're in one and if there's one question mark and no comma, yes.
Okay, so my question to the speaker is, has she, having a concealed gun permit and carrying the gun with you when you're out and about in town, let's say commuting to and from work, have you trained yourself with the use of that?
Trained herself?
Has she trained herself with the use of that weapon so that she feels confident that she could use it safely? And has she also considered the fact that if she had to use the gun in a urban environment, that there might be a collateral damage, and how does she deal with that risk assessment in considering whether or not to use her weapon?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the first question, yes, absolutely. And to the second question, this is why you use hollow point ammunition as opposed to full metal jacket. It is very likely to stop in the person that you are shooting and not have an entrance and exit wound.
And with that, the speaker and her questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, all of you, for this. So with that, we are going to go to another speech in the negative. I am looking for a speaker in the negative, and I am wondering if Roy Vela. Roy, are you in the room, and are you still good to speak at this point?
Sure.
Great. Roy, you have up to 4 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Luke, and I probably won't take the full 4 minutes. I'm going to try and just focus on the resolved, which is guns keep people safe. And the reality for me is that the risk of gun injury in keeping people safe is dramatically increased versus almost any other weapon that we have. And it also revolves around people's ability to make split-second decisions around defending themselves, but also being an aggressor as well. And we know very, very clearly in biology that when your adrenaline hits your system, your ability to make decisions and process is hampered. The reason that our military practice repeatedly over and over is to enhance that ability. And the risk of gun ownership being widespread is that we have a lot of mistakes. We are losing tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of normal citizens every year to gun death. And we far surpass any other what we would call fellow developed nation in terms of how many people we lose to gun violence. And I would say a lot of that is accidental, incidental, not intentional. It's not what the last speaker was saying about intentionally pointing at someone you want to take down and killing them. It's a bunch of incidental, accidental problems with a gun being on a hair trigger. It doesn't take, I don't know if I fired a number of different firearms, and it is not hard to fire a gun. It's designed that way, that it is very easy, and hence the increase of mistakes is dramatic. And look, I hear about the Second Amendment. You know, I think people love to ignore that, you know, well-regulated is how that amendment starts. And it is about having a call to arms at a different time when having a fully funded army was beyond our reach. And that is not the situation we're in today. So I feel in terms of the resolution, do guns keep people safe? I would say all of the evidence abundantly says no. By the way, I lived in London for the last 12 years, where most of the police in the city of London do not carry firearms. The safety there is dramatically higher than most of our major cities, unfortunately. So yeah, I think I will end there. I do have some stats about gun deaths in other, you know, nations that we would consider peers, like Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Spain, etc. And we outnumber them 3 or 4 to 1, which is sad, and I believe often mistaken, not due to intentional use of a firearm. And I'll end there.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to questions for the speaker. Let's first go to a question from Mike. Mike, please make sure to phrase it in the form of a question and ask it to me. You're on mute right now, Mike.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask a clarifying question, or Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker a clarifying question. He mentioned the term gun deaths, and I'm not sure what he means by that. Because I think there is an important distinction to draw between gun homicides, gun suicides, which make up the majority of what are known as, or what have been called gun deaths, and accidental gun deaths. And I think maybe by differentiating between those, we could get a lot better understanding of what role a gun actually plays in each of these deaths.
Thank you for that. That's a very important question. And Mr. Speaker, please address it however you please. You're on, you just went back on mute. And you're still on mute. There we go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's an important distinction, but I don't think it's important in terms of keeping people safe. So in 2020, 54% of gun-related deaths were suicide, around 24,000, and 43% were murders, around 19,000. But the reality is, in my opinion, it's much, much harder to kill yourself with something that's not a gun. It just is. And you're feeling bad and things are not good, and it's a very, I'm talking about millimeters to make a bad decision and take your life. And so, look, if the resolution is about guns keeping people safe, boy, like, bad decisions happen in split seconds. And when you're talking, I don't think you can just say, oh, well, I'm only talking about homicides. I don't think that's what the resolution is about. Is having guns in the populace keeping people safe? No, more people are dying because they're killing themselves, and it's way easier than any other method that we've come up with so far.
Just a very quick note for everybody in the room. The chair himself is entirely agnostic about how to interpret the resolution, so you may all interpret the resolution however you please. I think we all know the general nexus of things that it's talking about, but both the speaker and his questioner were in order on their remarks here, so thank you both for that. Let's go to a question from Sarah Bulger. Sarah, please unmute yourself and ask a question of the speaker to me.
Sure. I'm curious if the speaker believes that other countries have less gun-related deaths due to a more serious view on mental health care. You know, do they take mental illnesses more seriously than our country?
Interesting question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, Sarah, no, I concur that it is a systemic issue. It's not just about the availability of weaponry. It's how you I mean, not having a public health system that addresses everybody's needs is a serious challenge. And yes, a lot of that is, well, especially the majority of gun deaths, right? The suicide deaths, we as a society believe to be a mental health problem. Now, there's a whole other discussion of like, I don't want to be here anymore. That, that's a different debate, but the vast majority we classify as mental health challenges. And if it was harder to have a gun, have access to a gun, and pull a trigger and treat people up front, that would be a totally different situation in terms of those percentages.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much for that speech, and thank you, questioners, for the illuminating additional questions here. We are now going to go to a speech in the affirmative. I am looking for a speech in the affirmative on this resolution. All right. Let me do just a very quick thing. Mike, do you have a speech in the affirmative? Okay, I'm not going to call on you yet, but I am going to call on you soon. Edward McGlone, I would like to call on you for a speech in the affirmative first. So please unmute yourself. You have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I won't use the whole 4 minutes. The first speaker in the affirmative gave a great 4-minute breakdown of some of the constitutional and more modern arguments in favor of gun ownership, much of which I agree with, and I will avoid being redundant. So I will instead expand a non-question I had into a speech that covers my perspectives. I live in New York City, Long Island area. I have never fired a gun. I have no burning desire to ever own a firearm. It's just not something I have an affinity for or really care much about. Not to mention in New York, it's difficult to own one anyway. I currently choose to trust the government to protect me if someone with a firearm or another deadly weapon attacks me. So the reality of my situation is that I am giving away my right to protect myself, and I'm offloading it onto the government. In this case, I'm relying on the police force to respond in time to come to my aid. Despite my lack of affinity for weapons, I don't feel entirely comfortable with this. And if I ever were to own a gun, this would probably be the reason why. I would feel safer if I were attacked if I had a gun, or if a good person with a gun was around to help me before the police arrived. Even the best and fastest police force, and the NYPD might be at the top of that list, will need some time to respond unless they're right there, ready with a gun. I believe that most people are good and sane people, and I would never give a good and sane person a reason to shoot me. I'm never going to attack or hurt anyone for no reason. There are bad people and people who are suffering from personal demons that shouldn't have firearms. I support aggressive measures that keep guns out of their hands. And I would also support a policy that ensures that people who can and choose to own firearms are properly vetted and trained. The people who make it to the end of this process are deemed able to fit to carry to carry a firearm. I wouldn't fear them, and I believe they'd make me safer. That's the end of my speech.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. We will now go to questions from the speaker, but at one level, the chair would like to endorse and approve of the speaker's noble desire to never, quote unquote, give a good and sane person a reason to shoot him. The chair aspires to a similar level of magnanimity and control. However, he is not sure if he has succeeded or not. So I guess we'll find out later. So with that, we have time for questions for the speaker. I see a question from Michael Tilrico. Michael, please unmute yourself. Ask a question to me of the speaker. Michael?
Unmute Michael.
Michael, are you?
I apologize. Thank you,
Please
Mr.
ask your
Chair.
question to me.
So my question, Mr. Chair, is that it's very difficult to draw the line correctly to tell the difference between a good person and a bad person on a mass level. I completely agree that only good people should have guns, but how do we reasonably draw that line in order to ensure that we just simply don't take away people's rights who truly deserve it?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. Mr. Speaker.
It's a difficult question to address. I also share your concern. I don't want to draw lines too thick and it starts to take away good people who should own guns and make it difficult for them to get them. At some level, we have to have a faith in our democracy, a faith in the people we elect, a faith in our fellow man that we can come up with a system that will work for the best, for the most amount of people, the most amount of good. But it is difficult. I don't have a good answer for you in terms of a solution. But my general faith is that I do believe that most people are good. I would trust most people that have firearms. I hope that our government can find a system that ensures that's what happens, and not take away the right for people to own it, and not to make it easier for people who shouldn't own firearms to have them.
The chair smiles upon all admissions of not knowing, because the chair himself does not know most things as well, and is happy to see that he's not alone there. So thank you for that. Let's go to a second question from Rachel Aguirre. Did I pronounce that right, Rachel? Rachel
Aguirre.
Aguirre. Let's go to a question from Rachel Aguirre.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask the speaker how he feels about red flag laws. Because I'm just gonna ask the question, that's all. I've got lots to say.
Please feel free to get in line for a speech, chat to your whip, and we might take you if we have time. So, Mr. McGlone, red flag laws.
I don't have a great feel for them, because from all the real world examples that at least end up in major news that make it to me in New York City, they don't seem like they're really being enforced anyway. We see often, like such as Uvalde shooter. From my perspective, that person probably should have triggered some red flag laws. They were carrying on dead cats in a bag, probably something going wrong with that person. That person should have been flagged. So I don't have a feel for whether they work or don't work, or should exist or don't exist, because from my perspective, they're not really even being enforced or used much anyway, or at least very conservatively. So,
and with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Let us now go on to another speech in the negative. I am looking for a speech in the negative. Please raise your hands if you are interested in giving a speech in the negative. Did I see Molly Zeff? Molly, I would like to, Molly, you're on mute right now.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Molly, you have up to 4 minutes.
Sure, thank you. I am going to start with adding a little nuance, in my opinion. As debates often are, this one's set up to be a false dichotomy, right? Sometimes guns save lives and sometimes they don't. Big reveal, right? We've all talked about times when guns save lives and guns don't. So, you know, props to the organizers for making it so firm that we needed to take a side. That's good to take a stance, but there's also a lot more nuance here. There are, however, and we can all agree on this, there are better ways of keeping people safe, and it's not what we're doing now. That's very clear, because I don't think anyone here would argue that guns kept people safe in Charleston when a man murdered 9 people in a church, or that they kept people safe in Pittsburgh when 11 people were murdered in a synagogue while praying that morning, or in Uvalde where another man murdered 21 people. Actually, the more I say this, I wonder if we should only give guns to women after all. Sorry, side gender note there. Or another place in Sandy Hook, another gentleman murdered, not a gentleman, another young man murdered 27 people. Guns were not keeping people safe there, nor are they keeping anyone safe in gang violence on the streets of Chicago, one of our most violent cities, St. Louis, where I'm from, another very violent city. In all these places, guns are not clearly keeping people safe. Not those kids, not those adults, not those worshipers, not those people buying their vegetables for the week, not the people caught in crossfire innocently and from gang violence. So I'm interested in what we're all proposing, because I think there's a we here. We're all trying to work together in River Angels, right? This is not an us and a them. There's no us and them. This is one people in one America trying to figure out how to make people safer. That's my goal. And I think a lot of us are sharing that. Like, we want people to be safe. I heard that from everybody. And so I'm interested in what people are seeing as a solution to what's going on now, because it's not working. And I also want to be clear that that patchwork laws can help, but we know they only do so much. I'm going to take the extreme example of California, because as you know, as it's important to note. I made a, excuse me if I've already if this California specifically has come up tonight, but basically California is ranked #1 for gun safety by a particular report I found from the Giffords Law Center, and California itself saw a 37% lower death rate than the national average. Just to be really clear on that, more strict gun laws, lower death rate in California. Now, does it always work? Not at all. California had 8.5 deaths per 100,000 people compared to 13.7 deaths per 100,000 people. It'll never be zero, but wouldn't it be awesome if it were closer to zero? That would be pretty great to me. And so I want to break down like where some of the places patchwork doesn't work. So one is that we talk about background checks. Everyone murders a first time, right? If you don't have a history of other forms of crime, or something got wiped from your record, guess what? Background check doesn't work. Mental health history, I heard that come up tonight. This one drives me nuts because a lot of people have an unrecorded mental health history. A lot of people's mental health is not known to the public, or it's like known a little bit on Instagram to their, a few hundred followers. What good does that do? The people who find it later after he murdered your kid in school, right? So I just don't understand why patchwork laws would ever be enough. And again, they aren't enough in California, but at least they've done better. And I would just say that, like, if you really are in favor of patchwork laws, are you in favor of them to the point that you'd give up your grandpa or your daughter to gun violence? Because like we had a few patchwork laws, we did a little better. Is a little better what we really want, or do we want no school shootings? Do we want no shoot 'em up in grocery stores? Or do we want to patchwork our way to no murders? The patchwork way is it's like a solution that's in some ways like needed and also abhorrent to me as a human being, because I don't want anybody in my family to die, and my family goes to the grocery store in Boulder, and my sisters knew someone who was actually shot up in he didn't die, but shot up in the recent Illinois shooting on July 4th. So we're connected now. We're all intertwined with some of these deaths. And I'll say that, I have 11 nieces and nephews, and they've never grown up in a world where someone isn't often and randomly being shut up in a store or a school or a gay club or a concert. And I'd like to live in a world where that's no longer the norm, and our country has begun to accept that as the norm. That's the numbing, right, that we feel. So I'm going to say we can't get rid of all guns. But in my opinion, we need to stop valuing our guns more than we value a second grader's life, because that's what I see as actually happening in our country, is that we've dealt with this for years, and we're still putting the gun and this vague fear about some sort of government takeover we need to avoid, and not putting the second grader's life at the top of the agenda here as keeping that kid alive. And I'm tired of kids being shut up in math class. That's disgusting, right? We should all be disgusted, and we all I assume we all are to some extent. And I will lastly just add on a slightly, tongue-in-cheek, if real note, that the founders in the Second Amendment had no conception of an AK-47. That is not what they were talking about. That level of murder, that level of access, that level of ability to get an automatic weapon and shoot people up in school, that is not what the founders meant, because they couldn't have imagined.
You're a minute over.
I am so sorry, and I just want to put that I hope the founders, were they allowed today, would do a better job at putting the value of the second grader's life above the value of an AK-47, and that is all.
And with that, the speaker, who is wearing a very wonderful hat, is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We'll now have time for a few questions for the speaker. But first, the chair will note that he has no comment on the resolution resolved only women should own guns, but the chair would very much like to chair that debate purely because he would be interested to see what happens. So thank you for bringing up that thought to mind, and we shall mull and probably not do anything about it, but it's amusing concept at least. So, all right, let's go to a couple of questions for the speaker. First question will be from Mr. Robin Sperry. Mr. Sperry, please unmute yourself and ask your question to me. I can't hear you, Robin. I think you might be having an audio issue. Can you try to see if that might work? And let me go to another questioner first real quick, but we will come back to you for the second question if we have time. Let's go to a question from Karen Ward. Karen, please unmute yourself. You have, and please ask your question of the speaker to me.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to know why the speaker had mentioned several reasons why gun control would not work, but I would like to know if she considered enforcing the laws that are on the books and not letting convicted gun offenders out of prison.
Thank you, Karen. Molly, you may answer that however you like. Molly, you're on mute.
Sorry. Wow. No, I had not considered keeping everybody in prison permanently. I would say I think that option depends on the type of gun violence committed, in my opinion, but I don't know enough about it to give you a good answer. So I'm going to try to not speak about that. But I will say to your point that we're talking about then people who have already, to her point, that we're then getting into people who have already committed crimes and that still doesn't work with first-time offenders. I would love to see all of the gun laws in place enforced, but even if they were all enforced, there would still be a way right now for first-time offenders with no background and no mental health history, et cetera, to get an AK-47 and shoot up our kids.
Did you get your audio fixed, Robin? Do you want to try to? Okay, no worries at all. Feel free to chat things to your whip. So if there are things you'd like to ask in the future, let's take a question from Chip Treen. Chip, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I guess I would like to make a speech in the negative instead of a question. So can I wait till later?
Let me put you on my list and I'll try to get to you before we run out of time. I will do my very best. So in that case, let's take a question from Rachel Aguirre. Rachel, please. You good?
I actually want to speak in the affirmative.
Okay, great. In that case, don't worry. Let's take a question then from Rita Chisholm. Rita, please unmute yourself and ask a question of the speaker to me. Rita, I love you. Please keep the question in the form of a question.
I'm still learning, but keep hanging in there with me. Mr. Chair, would you please ask the speaker about her comment, which I really do believe she didn't mean literally. I give her the benefit of the doubt when she made the comment that an AK-47, whatever, I don't even, AK-47 or was more important than a second grader. I don't believe that that would be the, for those of us who are gun right advocates, I do not believe that that would be a fair comparison.
Thank you, Rita. Molly, you may address that however you like.
Sure, thank you. I would love to have dinner with the questioner. I already love the questioner's passion. See, I did it right that time. Look, I will just say, I think that actions speak louder than words. And I don't think that we have done enough since Columbine, which is when I was in high school in 1990, eighth grade in 1999. I don't think we have done enough to take action to limit access to guns. And not limiting actions has led to the death of many innocent people, including many children. I chose second graders because of the recent horrific debacle in Uvalde, but any age, take your age. And so what I mean is that I don't think the feeling is there. And I don't want to say that any person who speaks in the affirmative night actually believes that access to an AK-47 for anyone is more important than second grader's life. I think what I'm seeing is that the actions of politicians over time and us as a population pushing the politicians have continued to lead to the deaths of kids, even though we like to think as a society we value the children's lives more than access to guns. We are still continuing to provide so much access that children continue to die. So it was an action-based approach to my opinion there.
Madam Speaker, Madam Questioner, thank you for this exchange. I think this actually was a very helpful exchange, and I appreciate you two conducting it as you did. I will look forward to hearing how your dinner goes, and if we all happen to be in the same place at the same time, I would like to invite myself to that dinner. So I'll hit you guys up. So, all right, with that, the speaker and her questioners are thanked. Thank you very much for that. We are now going to go to another speech in the affirmative. I am looking for a speaker in the affirmative, and I actually am wondering, Mike from Philadelphia, I believe we had talked about you possibly giving a speech. Are you willing to give a speech?
Absolutely.
Okay, just so you know, we're going to, because there's a lot of people in line, we're going to go down from 4-minute speeches to 3 minutes. So just letting you know about that, but you are passionate and I am excited to hear what you're going to say. So you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been a gun rights activist for 10 years, so I have a lot of information which I'd like to share because generally it's been my experience that when I talk to people who support gun control, they've never heard of the information that I have, of the facts, verifiable facts. I'm not talking opinion, I'm not talking some sort of propaganda, but they're just so ignorant of the details and of the laws that we already have on the books. I think it really is a matter of education. So I'd just like to I want to talk about my personal experience carrying a gun, having been threatened by a gun, having someone I know have been killed by a gun. But before that, I want to just address a couple points really quickly. Number one, suicide is easy to do. You don't need a gun. Robin Williams and Michael Hutchins of In Excess killed themselves with a belt in their hotel room. And Jeffrey Epstein apparently killed himself with a sheet in his jail cell. The difference between the success of gun suicides versus other methods of suicides is that not all suicides are sincere. I'm not saying that they're not serious, but not all of them are a sincere attempt to kill oneself. Some of them are a cry for help. Many of them are. And, you know, I've seen in my own personal family, a family member of mine attempted suicide, but set it up so that she would be found and rescued. And if you look at the statistical differences between countries that have gun ownership, widespread gun ownership, like the United States, and other countries that don't, if you look at the overall suicide rate, there's no difference. There's no blip where you say, okay, America has all the guns, wow, a much higher suicide rate. Even comparing relatively similar, you know, well-developed Western countries. So that's something to look into. Another thing, we've been talking about assault weapons. Look, the assault weapons thing, that's a made-up term, made up by gun control activists to scare people. Nowadays, we're all talking about banning assault weapons, but in the 70s, they were talking about banning pistols, and pistols are actually used in the vast majority of gun homicides. Say probably something like 95, 98% assault, quote unquote, assault weapons are used in less than 100. And that's out of many thousands of gun homicides. Before, you know, you probably heard of the Coalition of Stop Gun Violence. It used to be called National Coalition to Ban Handguns. Okay, the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence used to be Handgun Control Incorporated. Look, the gun control activists admitted in writing that the only reason they changed their focus to assault weapons is because in the 70s, their attempts to completely ban handguns, which would completely eradicate the constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms to defend yourself outside the home, failed. The American public didn't buy it, so they had to pick a new target. And by coining this new term, assault weapons, they got to define it as to anything they wanted. So, you know,
Speaker,
many hundreds of different types of guns.
Can you finish up in 45 seconds?
Sure. Look, I've carried a gun here in the city of Philadelphia almost every day for the last 7 years. I've never shot anyone with it, but it has kept me a lot safer. I've had it when I've needed it. I've been assaulted and mugged many other times before. Got some pretty severe brain damage as well. They didn't need guns to beat the crap out of me or beat many other people to death. That sort of violence goes on here all the time. And your assailant, the criminals, they're always going to have an advantage. Look, they're one little, you know, 5'4" criminal is not going to pick on Andre the Giant and try to punch him out. Okay, if they have guns, they'll bring those. Generally, there will be many of the criminals. So even if it's just beating, look, in the last few weeks, teenagers, 13, 14-year-old teenagers have been assaulting random people walking down the street. One guy had a part of his skull removed to take pressure off his brain. A 73-year-old was beaten to death a couple weeks ago with a cone, among other things. And those 13, 14-year-olds didn't even have guns. But just because they outnumbered their victim, they were able to prevail. So, you know, responding to what a previous speaker said, guns are the great equalizer. Look, there's always going to be violence. And I'm sorry that that's the case. But guns, having a gun myself actually reduces violence. I've talked to many people, cops and other people who carry, and even the cops have told me, look, 9 times out of 10, if you start to draw a gun, don't even have to draw it, but if you just start, the criminal runs away. There's no violence. They don't hit you, they don't stab you, they don't shoot you. They just disengage because they don't want to get in a fight with you. So that's over. You prevented violence. That's the shortened version, but I think that's covered a lot of points. So.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We'll now take a question for the speaker. I want to just make a quick point because suicide was brought up. This is a very deep and important subject. A lot of folks have struggled with suicidal ideation, and I want to let everybody know here that we all in this room, including the speaker here and everybody here, takes the subject very seriously. And we should all be thinking on that as the complex issue that we many people in all of our lives have dealt with as it is. So, and speaker, thank you for giving us some insights on it as well too. All right, with that, let's take a question for the speaker. I want to go to Edward McGlone. Mr. McGlone, please unmute yourself, ask a question to me.
Thank you, Speaker. Chair, I'm generally in the affirmative that guns make people safer for the reasons I outlined in my own speech and that others have made in their speeches, including some of the points that you made. However, when I look around me, see mass shootings occur in other countries with stricter gun laws and less gun violence, my belief is shaken. I'm not eager to rush to defend the right to own guns in those moments when those tragedies occur. How does the speaker grapple with the reality of what is happening on the ground in the U.S.?
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, there are a number of things to consider when talking about mass shootings. I'm just 3 blocks away from the recent South Street quote unquote mass shooting that happened here in Philadelphia. But something you might not have noticed is that mass shooting had nothing to do with the mass shootings that we typically think of, like Uvalde. That started as a street fight. And idiots, they got into a fight, and then one guy started shooting and the other guy shot back. It was a very raucous and chaotic environment. I never go on South Street on a weekend night now. There's been a huge police presence. It's just been chaos, period. So when you see stats about there having been hundreds of mass shootings in America this year, most of that is it's like some urban shooting where typically drug dealers who have a beef with each other start shooting at each other without caring about who else might be hit. So that's one important thing to consider. Number two, again, most of these mass shootings that we think of, like at schools and movie theaters and malls or whatnot, they're happening in gun-free zones. And in at least some of these cases, the shooters, it was later discovered by the investigations that they planned their mass shooting specifically to happen in a gun-free zone. Gun-free zone would be like a movie theater that has a sign that says no guns, no guns are banned. And most, I'm thinking most, that's our understanding of the, anyway, like most people who carry concealed are very law abiding and they respect those sorts of private property rights, and they're not going to carry in there. So mass shooters who have months to plan these things out select venues like this to make sure that there's no one there who's going to be able to shoot them in 15 seconds, like just happened in Indiana. Mass killings happen in other countries, even where there are no guns. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Finish the sentence. Finish the sentence.
Sure. But look, I lived in Japan. I've got friends in China, and people use knives there. They use fire. They use vehicles. Determined maniacs who want to go and kill a lot of people will find a way. Again, terrorists in Europe, they've used bombs. They've also used vehicles. And you've got to consider, in the context of everything, not just my personal safety, safety of millions of others, defending ourselves from government tyranny and foreign invaders. These all come into play when you talk about mass shootings, which might kill 100 people per year.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the insight and for your passion in this subject. I particularly appreciate the note about many mass shootings being involved in gang violence. I was not deeply aware of that, but that intuitively fills in some gaps I was wondering about. So I appreciate your having brought in that little note. So, all right, with that, we are going to go to a speech in the negative. And because we're running up on time and I'm trying to get as many speakers in as I can before we have to adjourn and debrief, I'm only going to do one question per speaker after each speech, and we might go down to a round of 2-minute lightning speeches by 9:30 or so to get as many people in to speak as we can. But let's go to a speaker in the negative. I am wondering if Brad Dorsey is still willing to speak in the negative on this resolution. Brad?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, and your voice is very nice and baritone, and I want to hear it for the next 3 minutes.
I have heard that a few times. Good evening. I personally believe that guns, broadly speaking, do not keep us safer. Anecdotes are one thing, but I enjoy statistics, so I will leave you to ponder this. It's very important to highlight the most prevalent area of gun violence, which it really is suicide, as Roy eloquently has stated. According to pewresearch.org, suicides accounted for more than half of the US gun deaths in 2020. I also heard recently about suicides from the US versus other wealthy nations. Well, pardon me. According to a report from the Commonwealth Fund, a respected organization, the suicide rate in the United States is higher than 10 other wealthy countries, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Canada, Australia, Sweden, and many others. I personally choose to use the term gun safety instead of gun control because it is somewhat of gun control is a bit more divisive. We've all heard of Harvard University. The Harvard School of Public Health of all 50 US states reveals a powerful link between rates of firearm ownership and suicides. They also found in states where guns were more prevalent, as in Wyoming, where 63% of households reported owning guns, rates of suicide were higher. The inverse is also true. Where gun ownership was less common, suicide rates were also lower. The lesson seems to be many lives would likely be saved if people disposed of their firearms, kept them locked away, or stored them outside the home. HSPH professor of health policy David Hemingway stated, the studies show that most suicide attempters act on impulse. In moments of panic or despair, once the acute feelings ease, 90% do not go on to die by suicide. I would ask each of you, how many of you or any of who participate in the human experience have never had moments of panic or despair? Research also shows that whether suicide attempters live or die depends in large part on the readily availability of highly lethal means, especially firearms. Really quickly, Americans kill each other with guns 25 times the rate of other high-income countries. Every 16 hours, a woman is shot dead by her current or former partner. Access to a gun in the home increases the risk of death by suicide by 300%. And in closing, gun violence is estimated to cost the American economy at least $229 billion if money or the economy is a significant factor for you as individuals. You can find all of these statistics from a variety of different sources, the CDC, HCUP, the state emergency department databases, and state inpatient databases. They come with their statistics, and you can also find them at bradyunited.org. Like I said, I love anecdotes. I have personally never been threatened by anyone with a gun. I have shot firearms, not at anyone, but for fun, and it was fun. However, I do not own a weapon. I have a 6-year-old son, and I would never, and my wife would never wish to have a gun inside our home. And with that, I will end my speech.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. The chair notes that the speaker did use the term you several times, but the chair interprets the speaker's liberal use of you in the hypothetical you rather than any direct personal you, and thus rules it in order. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to one question for the speaker. Rachel Aguirre, do you have a question for the speaker? Okay, Rachel, I have you on my note. When we're doing questions, it just looks like you're trying to ask a question, so just keep that in mind. Do we have questions for the speaker? Let us take Chip. Is this a question for the speaker, or is it in line for speech? I'll keep your hand up when I call for speeches. I'll try to get to you. I can't promise it, but I'll try my best. Okay, so in that case, let's take a question for the speaker from Mike. Mike, please ask your question to me. And as always, please keep it in the form of a question.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I wonder what the speaker, what convinced the speaker that Harvard's statistics, anti-gun statistics are reliable when their center and Mr. Hemingway's salary are paid for by the Anti-Gun Joyce Foundation.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Speaker, you may address that however you prefer.
Thank you, Chairman. There are a number of organizations that do pay for certain studies, and they support different centers of research. However, Mr. Chairman, I believe we can go down a rabbit hole with the Heritage Foundation supporting a lot of different studies, et cetera. So it's really something that I struggle with too, in finding research that is incontrovertible. It's one of those rare things. It's almost like finding a unicorn, that if you can find a study that has not been contested by someone, whether or not they have proof to the opposite or the inverse, you could probably challenge any statistic coming from any side, but I am always open to research. So if anyone has any other research that they found reputable, please feel free to bring it to bear.
The chair does not make any rulings on truth or falsehood. The chair only makes rulings on procedure and appreciates everybody following procedure here. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, questioner. All right, with that, we are going to go to 2-minute speeches so that we can get as many speeches in as we can. Still on the affirmative and the negative. And so I am looking for a speech in the affirmative. I am looking for a speech in the affirmative. Rachel Aguirre. Rachel Aguirre, are you still willing to make a speech? Rachel?
Good evening, Chair. My name is Rachel Aguirre, and I am speaking on behalf of the affirmative of gun rights. And so I think we need to look at a couple things. Is that we're talking about guns, but the reality is that what the problem is not the guns. The problem is the way our society is going. It's the way our children are being raised, and it's the way that we have come to a place as a country that devalues life. So I want to bring up a couple of things. One of them is, let's talk about the red flag laws. So the red flag laws have been created specifically for the purpose of the government using our police officers as go-betweens to do the dirty work in order to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And what you're doing is when someone decides they want to tattle on someone for having a gun that they do not agree with or they do not like or whatever, then they report that person. And the next thing you know, the police are coming to typically a law-abiding citizen's home. They're trying to they're there to take the guns away. And then what we find out is now you've got a law-abiding citizen shooting and defending their constitutional rights against the police. And the government has then perpetuated more violence amongst law-abiding citizens. And the federal law that was passed regarding red flag laws, I don't know if people know this, but they are now bribing states to create red flag laws in order to and with money. Like, we will give you money if your state passes red flag laws. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that we can talk about, I think we need to, first of all, if you don't know and it hasn't been said, an AR-15 is not an assault rifle. It is Armalite rifle. That's what that AR stands for. Okay, it's not assault, it's Armalite. But when someone comes into, well, first of all, we looked up mass shootings. Do you know that only 2 people have to be killed and be considered a mass shooting? So let's look at how many people on a daily basis are killed in Chicago in a gun-controlled state. So when we're talking about mass shootings, it varies. It starts with 30
seconds.
Okay, thank you. So my whole point, the next thing I want to talk about real quick is the fact that it is not about the guns that are the problem. The problem is the way our society is. The problem is that we as a society have devalued life, and that we need to change that whole attitude. And as a gun carrier, in Missouri, we are constitutional carry. I carry a gun because I will make sure that if anyone walks into a public place that I am at, I will make sure to defend myself and my family. Second of all, regarding, and I'll finish this up. Second of all, when we're talking about school shootings, I am a teacher, but you know the best way for us to provide safety for our students, we need to be able to have retired military and retired police officers who are trained in this whole, and trained in being able to take down an offender to protect our children. And not only that, but we're providing them a job, income, we're providing them benefits, and we're providing them insurance. So I would suggest that we really start putting our focus on letting our police officers, or retired police officers and military protect our children. But I will tell you, as a teacher, if I was given permission, I would carry a gun because I have made sure that I am safe and I'm responsible, and I've done the training for to protect students and other people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Madam Speaker, thank you for this, and thank you for your patience as well. I'm going to probably do a little bit less questions moving forward, so we can get a few more speeches in from people who've been very patient. So we won't go to questions on this one, but I will now go to a speech in the negative on the resolution. And I believe I saw Chip Treen hoping to make a speech. Chip, you have 2 minutes.
I don't have near enough time, but I don't know exactly where to start. I'm kind of horrified at listening to, and I guess I'm being a little more emotional than I should, about listening to the gun rights people. I guess I'd like to look at this from a sense of just common sense. If you have more people with guns, you're going to have more people getting shot with guns. That's just common sense. So the idea that somehow having guns is making us safer, this just flies in complete, it just doesn't make any sense. We have thousands and thousands of Americans killed every year with guns, and that is not happening in Europe. Yes, there are some people get killed with guns, but the guns originating and made here proliferate themselves all over the world. Fortunately, many of the other countries are much more effective in limiting them. Somebody made the comment that we need to protect ourselves against insurrection. I want to remind you on January 6th that the insurrectionists with the guns were the people attacking the duly elected representatives of our country, not the reverse. We're not defending democracy, they were trying to get rid of it. So I guess it's the idea that we're somehow going to defend ourselves against an army. Are the Canadians or the Mexicans going to come after us, and we're somehow safer by everybody having a gun? Second Amendment, it talks about a militia. It doesn't give every Tom, Dick, and Harry the right to have a handgun. It doesn't say that. And as somebody pointed out, that's just not the way life is. We do not have, the idea wasn't to give everybody a handgun, because look what happens. If you go into a Walmart or any store, do you feel safer with people walking around with assault rifles? Or do you feel like I want to go somewhere else where there's not guns sitting around? And for most of us who are honest with ourselves, we'd rather go somewhere else. More guns doesn't make us safer. One of our speakers mentioned she had a shotgun under her bed. That was me completely terrifying. What happens if somebody stumbles in her room, or if she has a bad moment, if she gets disoriented, she stumbles, she's not awake, there's a noise, and it turns out it's the police. That's what happened in a local shooting here. And then the accidents. How many kids are killed every year by a kid shooting another kid because the parents don't keep the gun locked up? Well, if the gun's locked up, how good is it for self-defense? It just isn't going to be very useful. So the idea that, and somehow we all think we're magic supermen watching the TV and the movies. We're not. So the idea that somehow we're some kind of a magic person that can just protect ourselves and pull out a gun because somebody's threatening me, maybe we feel safer until somebody comes from behind me and grabs me before I had a chance to get my gun out. And then I get my gun out and I start shooting and I got the people all around me. It just doesn't make sense that we're safer by having more guns. In other countries where there aren't more guns, there are a lot less deaths. And yes, knives can kill and other things can kill, but you can recover a lot more quickly from a knife wound than a gun wound. And one knife will kill one person, one gun can kill hundreds of people, as we saw in that guy in Las Vegas. And finally, what can we do about it? I know the reality, they're not all going to go away, but let me just mention a couple things. We could have a ban on magazines. We could have a registration system. We could make the gun manufacturers liable for misuse of their guns, which is ammunition could be restricted. The CDC restrictions from their research could be relifted. The gun lobby has kept them from doing legitimate research. And then the current process to identify guns is hampered by the rules set up by the gun lobby. So we just made this system. Anyway, I'll let go of that, but I just think we need to have a little more common sense, and maybe we think about this problem a little differently.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And also thank you for being open about your feelings over the course of this debate. We all see and we all appreciate your frankness and honesty with all of us here. So thank you for that. Let's go to another speech in the affirmative. Let's go to a speech in the affirmative from Michael Tillerico. Michael, you have around 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will do my best to get through this speech without getting too terribly emotional. But I was a freshman at Virginia Tech during the Virginia Tech shooting. I've had friends killed. I've had I've had teachers killed that I knew that were friends. I've had people killed within 3 feet of me. It was the scariest, worst, most, I guess, self-realizing part of my life that I realized that I felt like a worthless human being. I felt like that I wasn't worth anything, that someone could take my life that easily. And to be honest, yes, it took me probably 3, 4, 5 years with therapy to get through it and to get past it. During those 5 years were very difficult for me, and it was a very difficult part of my life. I spiraled out of control for better or worse terms, but luckily I made it out the other side. I ended up getting my degree. I ended up getting done with college. And thank you very much. But that's what forms my opinion on why I should be able to defend myself, because unless you've had a gun pointed in your face, unless you've had people die right next to you, unless you've seen that happen, unless you've witnessed, unless you've bear witness to that, you will never understand what it feels like to not be able to defend yourself. Now, at the age of 18, would I have been able to defend myself with a gun? I don't know. That's difficult to say. But my opinion is formed based on that. And a lot of people come through here and talk about statistics and talk about the numbers. Let me talk about a quick number real quick. And that quick number is, if you look, because I graduated from college and got my degree for data science. This is my whole life, statistics. That's what I do for a job every single day, in and out. And when I look at the numbers from FBI.gov, what I see is 5 major cities that have huge gun problems, have huge gun issues with people getting shot. And then I see other issues with these active shooter situations that are sprinkled around the country, but are still horrible, horrible events, because I know what it's like. I know what it feels like for the rest of those kids to go through that. I know the pain and suffering that they're going to go through for the next 5 years. And I say, well, if we ignore 5 cities in the US, just 5 worst cities in the US, which only accounts for less than 6% of the population, our gun crime is actually in line with the rest of the world. We're middle of the pack. It's no longer a big issue. And it's no longer the top issue or the top gun crime in all of the world. And as for suicides, a lot of people talk to that. I understand that. I felt suicidal for a very long time because of that, because of what I went through. And I absolutely should have not have been able to own a gun. And I didn't. My dad took it away from me. I had parents. I was lucky enough to have parents that were looking over me to say, you are not in a headspace to own a gun. But in terms of suicides, we are number 12 in terms of We are number 12 in our suicide rate relative to other countries that have almost total bans of guns. And yes, ease of use, I understand that argument, but just look at the numbers. We're middle of the pack if you ignore the top 5 cities. Those top 5 cities have the worst and most harsh gun laws in the US, but they're the top 5. And other than those top 5, if you look at the rest of the country as a whole, we're dead middle of the pack. Let's talk about suicide. Yes, people that are suicidal should not be able to own guns. How we do that on a large level and stop people from owning those guns, I have no idea, but I wish we could do it. And in terms of suicides, we are not the worst. We are 12. And I don't think guns has made it any worse for the United States or any better, but we have a whole nother problem in terms of things that we need to solve that don't necessarily have to do with guns. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. And the chair would particularly thank the speaker for bringing his personal experience with a very traumatic moment in American history and in his own life in a way that has certainly helped me think. And I'll be mulling this for a little bit. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and open to all as well too. So with that, let's go to a speech in the negative. Jet Verts, I saw your hand up earlier. I was wondering if you're still willing to make a speech in the negative.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Great. You have around 2 minutes.
Yeah,
about 2 minutes.
Mine is really neither negative or positive, but I do believe passionately in controlling gun violence in America. And I believe that we are taking a wrong approach to gun control as is problem-solving gun violence. Okay, so to give you my background, give my position, let me give you my background. I went to junior high and high school in Mississippi, and I graduated from Mississippi State University with aerospace engineering. When I graduated, I got a job and worked at GE Aviation in Lynn, Massachusetts. And whole entire my adult life, I lived in blue state, and I was trained, grew up in a red state in Mississippi. Okay, so my position is this, okay? When I was living in Mississippi, all of my neighbors had guns. Practically everybody had gun back in our pickup truck went around. I don't ever remember having gun violence, mass shooting during that period of time. And I think most of everybody that I lived there had guns, okay? Then I went to work for aerospace engineering, aircraft engine manufacturing. Whenever there's any kind of crash, any kind of incident of aviation, we always went to look for root cause of that crash, rather than, oh, engine fell out, it must be engine. No, we always look for root cause. What I like to see is that whenever we have a gun violence, I like to look into people, instead of saying gun control, gun control, gun control, what about looking into root cause of why somebody did this shooting, okay? So my thinking is, instead of saying control the guns, to every shooting incident, Uvalde or Hyde Park in Chicago, why don't we try to get to the root cause of incident? What is it causing those gun violence? As Rachel said, it may be our society, or maybe we're going away from our Judeo-Christian principle. We don't value our lives. We need to look at the root cause of the gun violence rather than controlling the guns. That's my speech.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I probably should have had you speak in the affirmative, but I appreciate you speaking nonetheless on that.
Okay.
With that, we're going to go to 2 quick final speeches, and then we will do a quick debrief from there. One of those speeches will be in the affirmative, another will be negative. Let's go to a speech from Elizabeth Jeffries. Elizabeth, are you still in the room?
I'm so sorry. I'm having trouble. Like my fingers are too fat to hit my mute in time. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. You have 2 minutes. I'm sure your fingers are not too fat at all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My opinion regarding today's resolution is that guns keep people safe. I am going to talk about 3 different things: the no gun zones, profiling, and hurricanes. So many of the mass shooting incidents of the past few years have occurred in what I term gun-free zones. In most tragic cases, these may not be due to law, but are at venues where we pass through checkouts where bags are packed, or we are some form of metal detector is used. Tragically and sadly, such events have occurred at nightclubs such as Orlando in Florida, airports such as LA and Hollywood International, which is 5 minutes from my house, malls such as in Indiana, businesses, grocery stores such as Buffalo, military bases such as Fort Hood, movie theaters such as Aurora, Colorado, multiple schools, including colleges, baseball fields in DC, concerts in Nevada,
Elizabeth, you
multiple
have 1
houses
minute.
of worship. Thank you. Gang and gun violence in cities is criminal and should be treated as an unlawful act. Now people can be profiled. A lot of these people have manifestos and have a cry for help. They're going to soft targets. With regard to hurricanes, we were without power for 3 weeks, no ATMs, no gas. Oh, by the way, I am a member of the NRA. I do not own a gun, and my daughter is in the military.
Elizabeth, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, so hurricanes. People were afraid, hungry, stressed, hot, and unprepared. A lot of people can't afford generators. Fortunately, police can be a moderating factor. But what occurred to me was good people in desperation could break in to get water, food, cash, and police are protecting communities. So in other words, and also thieves just ransacking businesses and homes.
Elizabeth, can you finish up?
So my last thing is that I am considering buying a gun, and I think that with gun safety education, possibly FBI dedicated teams to look at manifestos and better mental health support, I affirm that guns can keep people safe.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for our final affirmative speech this evening. We're going to go to a final negative speech this evening, and I would like to call on Catherine Jansky. Catherine, are you still here? Catherine?
Yes. Hi.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. I'm gonna be just hopefully under time in case anyone wants to ask a question or anything. But I am 22, so I was in my senior year of high school when the shooting in Florida happened. I was not born yet when Columbine happened, and so I've been sort of living with the specter of mass gun violence my whole life. One small note on that, I've heard 2 people mention that mass shootings are only 2 or more people being killed. It's actually like 3 or 4 more being killed, depending on like the statistic of usage. But I don't want to get bogged down in that. It just is a really terrifying thing, because I was also sitting in class every single day, and I'd have mapped out my escape routes if someone walked through the door with a gun. And that issue with the sort of gun-free zones, and people are claiming that gun-free zones don't work. My counter argument to that would be, as also a New Yorker who just had her gun restriction laws taken away by the Supreme Court, that like being in a gun-free zone or one of those zones can feel like you're a fish in a barrel if you're in a state where it's easier to get guns. That's sort of that's speaking from my personal experience, and something that I wanted to put out there about the issue of like what is a mass shooting and also what it feels like to be in a gun-free zone for my entire life while this is going on. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for closing us out. And thank you very much, all of you who have spoken tonight and all of you who have asked questions tonight. This has been an interesting debate and we're about to go debrief on it. But I need first for us to debrief a motion to adjourn. So do we have a motion to adjourn? I see a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second to that motion to adjourn? All right, I see that second. So with that, this debate is adjourned.